Welcome back to Tom's World Scale Model Series. In this episode, we undertake the construction phase of our 1/35th Scale Dragon SDKFZ 165 Hummel. If you enjoy programming on scale modeling, then show your support by subscribing to this channel. Leave us a comment, like, dislike, or share the video with friends. Clicking the notification bell gives you alerts when we post new content, or visit the channel Tom's World for a friendly visit for a complete list of all our videos. Having completed our inbox review, it's time to dig into this monster of a kit. Step by step, we'll look at the construction process, and along the way, we'll discuss some of the good and bad points of this most challenging kit. We're in for a journey, so sit back as we dive into the build. Our journey starts with assembling the running gear. The final count 32-part wheels for a total of 60, not counting their hubs. The sprues are warped, but the parts, thankfully, are unaffected. Dragon's Panzer IV running gear sprues have been around for a while, and they're definitely starting to show their age. As we work with the sprues, we see evidence of slide molding. Still, as we'll see later, the kit has its share of knockout blemishes, as well at times excessive sprue gates and remnants. Multiply that by 400 parts means lots of cleanup. Parts in the kit are beautifully detailed, like the lettering on these return rollers. To save time, we glue the running wheel pairs together. I rotate the wheels so the sprue remnants are aligned. After the glue on these wheels dries completely, we can then go in with a sprue cutter. Final smoothing is done with sanding sticks and progressively fine grits. Follow the wheel's round surface carefully to avoid flat spots. While the wheel set isn't as intense as, say, a Tiger, the Panzer IV running gear is still a tedious, well, if not relaxing process. It's a perfect time to put on a movie, music, or an audiobook. In addition to the paired road wheels, each bogie is made up of 6 parts. The assembly is simple and the pieces fit tightly. Dragon does not polycap their wheels, so to ease painting and weathering, I'll glue them on the suspension later. The kit is, to my taste, a bit over-engineered in places. For example, the bump stop and its bracket on the side of the hull are separate pieces. Many other manufacturers mold pieces like this on, which saves the builder time. But Dragon does key most of their parts, like the back of this bogie. This makes assembly less prone to errors. Again, no polycaps, so we'll install the wheels later. That makes painting and weathering them and the hull much easier. Dragon kits are for people who appreciate a high level of detail and find the work of construction enjoyable rather than a chore. The work is worth it, the parts are crisp, and the details are arguably second to none. Here I'm dry fitting the fighting compartment floor. The fit is tight and it sits nice and flat. Next comes the gun deck. The seam where it touches the front slope, which I've already glued in place, is a little loose. The decking flexes so we can't press too hard when attaching it. The fenders then go on the sides. The fit on the slope and decking is good, but not perfect. Still, the seam is pretty small and we can easily fill the gap. Or we could even continue with a weld bead using stretched sprue shape with a little glue. The seam where the gun deck and slope mate will need a little care. I'll apply some thin cement on the seam and hold it together until dry. It may need a little sanding and touching up before painting. Total of 8 parts make up the muffler. I didn't need any filler. Just use enough glue so a bead oozes out the sides when the halves are pressed together. Let the glue dry completely, then sand the bead and the seam should disappear. We'll install the muffler later so we can texture and weather it separately. This kit has many tiny parts like these doodads that go in the fighting compartment. You'll need high quality precision tweezers, steady hands, and good bench lighting to tackle these teeny patience testers. Still, if we can keep all these tiny parts away from the carpet monster, they add nice touches to this already highly detailed fighting compartment deck. The gun builds up using 66 parts, give or take. Here I'm assembling one of the equilibrators. If you build your gun to elevate, these cylinders will extend and retract. Part A39, the breech liner didn't fit very well and a little surgery was needed to coax it into place. Test fitting the gun slider and rail. I remove PE parts from their frets with a sharp X-Acto knife blade. Here I'm using a cheap dollar store glass cutting board which gives me a hard straight surface to cut on. This ensures the delicate parts aren't bent or distorted as I apply pressure to the blade. The sprue remnant is then removed using a diamond file. CA glue is used to attach brass to styrene, and since CA dries fast and is unforgiving, I always test fit. I'll eventually mark the position of the placard with a mechanical pencil so I know where to plop the piece down once the glue is applied. Still more parts to go, but the gun is starting to take shape. The drawback of the photo reproductions was bore out as in this picture. Some of the tiny parts are reduced to almost indistinguishable blobs. I found myself combing reference pictures often during this build. In our part 1 video where we looked at the instructions and sprues, I did actually make a mistake when interpreting one of the building symbols. I thought the symbol indicated where holes would be drilled. The symbol actually reads file hole in the instruction key, but that's obviously incorrect. It should read fill hole. Closer inspection of the side shields reveals shallow round dents. We'll need to fill these before painting the exterior. The instructions depict a mounting tab on the side of the hull. That's where the antenna mounts. The tab was missing on my hull. Without the aid of the tab, care must be taken when installing the antenna mount to ensure it's straight and aligned. We have to look carefully for sink marks. They don't always match the pictures in the instructions, and sometimes they're very subtle. Here I've marked the ones that need leveling. By dry fitting and working ahead, we can figure out which sink marks get hidden and which need filling or sanding. Sink marks on small but exposed pieces like these are really easy to miss. But thank goodness nasties like these are hidden, so we can ignore them. In general, the kit does a good job of keeping sink marks away from highly visible parts. Here we can see the rear fighting compartment doors are crisp and clean. Also watch out for raised alignment marks that aren't covered with parts. This example is pretty obvious, but some are very subtle. The unused ones should be removed. The first annoying problem arose in step 20. Parts 016 and 017 simply did not fit as they overlapped the side exhaust pipes. There's simply no way to gracefully fit the parts. But through the magic of video framing, I was able to hide the ugly surgery that's required to complete the assembly. This sort of poor kit engineering is inexcusable, given this is a premium kit that sells for top dollar. More problems as the final bits are added to the gun. In step 10-11, I found part A59 did not fit logically, so I didn't bother to install it. Also, referring to the sprue map, part N15 isn't even used. Every reference photo of the 15cm SFH18, including kit builds of the Hummel, showed this part installed. Although installing N15 is not called for anywhere else in the instructions, in later steps it appears mysteriously. The part is actually the gunner's sight. Since any vehicle fit for combat would have it, I decided to install it. Dragon is legendary for these kind of whoopsies in their instructions. Step 21 illustrates the construction of the gun shield. The bolts on the two side shield liners are depicted facing in. They actually should be installed facing out. The shield attachment illustration is rudimentary at best, and the pins where the shield attaches to the bottom of the gun mount are easily mistaken for bolt detail. The lack of clear witness marks made installing the gun shield a real pain. Reference pictures and a lot of dry fitting were required. Here's how the assembly should look when dry fit. The inner shield top should match exactly with the tops of the front plates of the fighting compartment. Dragon gets this wrong in the instructions. There are quite a few small parts to install on the slope and around the driver's compartment. The little tie-down hooks are near microscopic, and Dragon doesn't give you any extras. You really have to exercise care when working with these parts. There are 4 bins that get installed in the fighting compartment, and we have to build them up. Each is comprised of at least 4 parts, but additional parts are required if the ammunition bin is posed open. No problems here, the parts are beefy and have ample joint surfaces. I press on the edges to ensure the joints are tight, and I'll check to make sure the sides are square to one another and straight. One last look at our handiwork before the first phase of painting. Since the Hummel is open-topped, gluing on the fighting compartment shields will make painting and weathering the interior very difficult. I decided to pre-paint and weather the interior before enclosing the fighting compartment. I would have preferred using an olive drab for my shadow coat, but all I had in enamel was flat black, so on it went. It's cut heavily, maybe 60 to 70% mineral spirits to paint. Here I used Hobby Master enamel. I apply several thin coats and build up the color slowly. It's always easier to add paint rather than take paint off, so when airbrushing that's a good way to work. I want a nice even smooth coat to everything. I'm only painting the exposed interior surfaces for now, so overall construction of the model can progress. That way we can also get at the interior surfaces to paint and weather them that would otherwise be hard to reach if we fully completed the model before painting. Here I'm applying a sort of rust patina to the decking of the fighting compartment. The color is mixed using red, brown, and black enamel, again in the Model Master flavor. This rusty steel color is sprayed on very lightly, again diluted to about 60 to 70% thinner. The color looks a little stark on video, but it's actually subtle. Here I'm highlighting the interior parts with white Model Master enamel. This black and white technique is a simple way of giving flat surfaces some depth. It'll also help to modulate our fighting compartment overall color, which will be painted a monochrome dunkelgelb. I mixed the white paint a little too thick, but the white highlight doesn't need to be perfect. I like and usually use Tamiya's XF60 dark yellow whenever spraying a dunkelgelb base coat. This time I wanted to try a bottle of Model Master enamel since I had it on hand. The color is their Panzer Dunkelgelb 1943. Again I build up thin coats gradually. Once the paint's dry, it'll give us a nice mottled, graduated look. I sprayed the fighting compartment floor on top of the rusty steel color with hairspray, and over top that went a coat of Tamiya's XF60 acrylic. You can thin the acrylic paint using Tamiya XF20 thinner, or you can just thin it with water. I went heavier than usual with the hairspray since I was looking more for a worn look rather than chips on the floor. It was a bit of an experiment. I figured I couldn't go wrong since it'll dirty up the floor later when we do our final weathering. It's the classic hairspray technique. With a brush wetted with water, I simply rub the acrylic paint off until I get the desired effect. I then sealed all the interior parts and surfaces with clear acrylic floor polish. This protects the paint layers underneath. I can then go in with a pin wash using burnt umber oil paint. The clear coat lets the pin wash flow into the nooks and crannies, and it picks up the details beautifully. Once the oil paint goes dull, indicating it's almost dry, I feather the edges to blend the color and to remove any tide marks. This simple technique really brings the part to life, adding depth and realism. Here I'm brush painting chips. I use an enamel, lighter in color than my base coat first, where I want deep chips or gouges. I'm using Hummel 94 enamel, so-called brown-yellow matte, but any light sienna color will do. Go easy on these deep chips. They look convincing, but putting too many in spoils the effect. I then add more brush painted chips using an enamel Panzer Gray color, again Model Master. I also paint the Panzer Gray inside the lighter colored chips, being careful to leave a light colored border. This is a great technique for creating realistic looking gouges and deep chips. Always place your chips in logical places wherever surfaces would get worn by service and battle damage. Using the same Panzer Gray enamel, I also like to add chips with a sponge, again sparingly so as not to overdo it. It's a good idea to rotate the sponge now and again to vary the pattern. And make sure to dab most of the paint off before tapping the model, otherwise you'll end up with a hard to fix mess. We want tiny, delicate, random dabs. And just as you think you need a bit more, stop. Our black and white undercoat, pin wash, and chipping create a nice base for our interior surfaces. I used AK Interactive's True Metal paint to coat the powder bag shells. The bin still needs some touching up, but the brass color works pretty well for small areas like this. If I'm not happy with the look during final construction, I can always put the cover on the bin. Here are the interior pieces after a very light acrylic clear coat was applied. Using a very light colored oil paint, I lightly blended in highlights. This gives the surfaces a nice mottled look. I'll test fit one last time before sealing up the fighting compartment to see if I should give the interior more attention. I love weathering, but no sense investing time on areas that get hidden later. And that will conclude this part 2 of 3 of our Dragon 1/35th scale Hummel kit review and build. Stay tuned for part 3 where we'll complete construction and adorn our Bumblebee with a beautiful period wartime finish. Please subscribe to the channel, and as always, thank you for watching, stay well, and all the best.